भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaste, hello friends. As a part of celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, we ran a podcast series called Bharat ki Kahani Meenakshi Lekhi ki Zubani. 75 stories for 75 days run up to India's 75th Independence Day. Now, these stories, which were earlier available on the website of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, Spotify and various other platforms, will now be available to NAMO app virtual meet as Bharat ki Kahani Meenakshi Lekhi ki Zubani. Happy listening, keep listening and stay tuned to NAMO app. It's an initiative of NAMO app volunteers. I thank them all through you.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Hello friends, Namaste, Namaskaram. Today I bring to you a story from the heart of India, the state of Madhya Pradesh. This story is about Tatya Bhil, who was described by the New York Times as the Robin Hood of India in 1889. He used to loot from the British authorities and distribute the looted wealth among the poor. Born to Bhav Singh Bhil in Khandwa district of Madhya Pradesh in 1840, in some documents, Tatya's date of birth is also mentioned as 1842. Tatya was one of the greatest revolutionaries who fought an armed struggle against the British continuously for 12 years. Tatya belonged to the indigenous tribe or the Adivasi community of India. He was a Bhil warrior from the Khandesh hills of Madhya Pradesh. The tribal uprising against the British had started shortly after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, and it continued right until independence. Tribals in many parts of the country led various rebellions against the British to fight their unlawful rules. The Kol in Chota Nagpur in 1832, Santals in Jharkhand, Odisha, and West Bengal in 1855, Bhils in Madhya Pradesh in 1831, and so many more. The British were interested in the rich resources of the forest, which were occupied by the tribals. So, they started introducing non-tribals in the area, which led to loss of land for the tribals. The tribals therefore opposed the entry of any outsider in their land. However, the British started their own laws to govern the forest area, while tribals practiced shifting agriculture and joint ownership of land. The British introduced settled agriculture and private ownership of land. This led to a loss of livelihood for the tribals and reduced them to being landless laborers on their own ancient land. The British introduced moneylenders who further exploited the poor tribals and left them to be mere bonded laborers on their own land. While the tribal population was egalitarian society, the British declared them the lowest in the social rung since they did not follow any caste system, even though from time immemorial the tribals had been the keepers of the forests. In 1865, the British established the Forest Act, taking full control of the forest under them. All these changes by the British led to constant strife between the British and the tribal population across the country. Various tribes stood up against the British in rebellion, but any tribe which resorted to arms to protect their rights, the British declared them criminals and took away all their rights on the land. With no resources left to make a living, they had to resort to armed possession of what they could get hold of. This helped the British further in making a case of criminalization against many tribes. The condition of the tribals became horrible due to these changes, and they became poorer and poorer. Amongst the Bhil tribal community in Khandesh Hills, a warrior was born who could not see this injustice and stood up against the British. Tatya must have been 17 years of age when the first war of independence took place. He was so inspired by how people stood up to the British that After the 1857 rebellion, he took it upon himself to continue fighting the British. He would loot the treasure of the British government and its associates and distribute it to the poor and needy people. He spoke out about the exploitation of the poor at the hands of British. This made him very popular amongst common people, and in a very short time he garnered a big following. He became the hero of the tribals and the downtrodden and was fondly referred to as Tatya Mama. However, in the British accounts, Tatya became a criminal. He was arrested in 1874 and released after a year. After being released, he continued to see the abject poverty that his tribal community was subjected to by the British. People had no food to eat, they had no resources, and the British only kept taking away their land, their right to agriculture and hunting. So Tatya again resorted to looting and also undertook kidnapping and theft. He was arrested another time in 1878. He escaped from the prison in 3 days' time, and the British proclaimed him a dacoit. Tatya used his guerrilla warfare skills to overcome the British and continued to plunder their wealth. Being a tribal, he could even imitate the sounds of animals, a skill that helped him send out signals when in danger. He would assault the British with such stealth and speed that they were taken by surprise, and he would vanish with just as much speed as he would appear, giving little time to his opponents to respond. Apparently, Tatya Tope was inspired by Tatya Bhil to learn the guerrilla techniques. Tatya was so agile that people started to believe that he had magical powers. In a popular story that they narrate, Tatya's legendary skills find mention. The story talks about how 2,000 soldiers had once come to catch Tatya, and after hours of efforts, they had to go back empty-handed. Tatya had disappeared into thin air. His myth was even larger in another story where they inform on how Tatya could convene meetings in 1,500 villages simultaneously. Ultimately, Tatya was arrested and jailed in 1889 after some of his trusted people betrayed him and shared his whereabouts. He was kept in the central jail in Indore and later shifted to Jabalpur jail. During the time he spent in jail, he was brutally tortured. He was finally hanged to death on December 4th, 1889. Fearing unrest and rioting from the neighboring villages, the British authorities threw Tatya's body on the railway tracks of Khandwa railway line near Patalpani railway station. On the presumed spot, a samadhi was constructed to honor the hero and is called Samadhi Sthal of Tatya Bhil. Even today, the train driver pulls the whistle each time a train crosses the samadhi as a mark of respect to their hero. In December 2021, a grand statue of Jan Nayak Tatya Mama was unveiled by the government of Madhya Pradesh in Tatya's honor at Patalpani. Further, the Indore bus stand and Patalpani railway station in Indore has been renamed after Tatya Mama by the state government. He is still revered amongst the tribal community of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh till date. Let us recall his contribution to our freedom movement in this 75th years of independence. 25 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
सत श्री अकाल मित्रों, की हाल बढ़िया? नमस्ते. Today I bring to you a story from the land of the revolutionaries Punjab. This story is about Banta Singh, who was a born revolutionary. He was against the practice of money lending as he thought it led to the exploitation of poor people. As a child, he destroyed the ledgers of his father, which mentioned in detail the money loaned and returned over time by the individuals. Mostly Banta's work was supportive of the peasants, who largely benefited from his act as they were now free from the clutches of repayment. Banta Singh was the son of Bhutta Singh from Sangwal village in Jalandhar. Born in 1890, he did his initial studies from DAV school, traveling via China. He went to the USA for higher studies. In USA, he joined the revolutionary movement carried out by the Ghadar party. Banta Singh vowed to free India from the British rule and built a strong revolutionary center in Sangwal upon his return in 1914 and prepared ground to carry out the armed rebellion. The village became the center of revolutionary activities. To spread information about the Ghadar movement, leaflets were printed and distributed in the region. People were encouraged to join the movement to usurp power from the British. Banta Singh started a panchayat, a library, a veterinary hospital to reduce dependence on the British administrative system. The panchayat was given the powers to resolve local disputes to ensure access to justice was quicker and more effective. It was important to educate people, and school was the only means to make that happen. So Banta Singh established a school in his own village. As part of the revolutionary movement, Banta Singh and his team of comrades damaged the railway line, showcasing their resentment against the British rule. Whenever revolutionary activities were to be carried out, the telephone lines were cut so that messages could not be passed on by the British for more force and supplies. During Banta Singh's time, Sangwal village became the hub of revolutionaries. It was frequently visited by the likes of Kartar Singh Saraba, Harnam Singh Tundilat, Munsha Singh Dukhi, and Maratha revolutionary Vishnu Ganesh Pingle. Banta Singh carried out a number of activities on his own, and on one such occasion he travelled to Lahore to procure firearms, as the British intelligence was keeping a close eye on the revolutionary activities at Lahore, which was the hub of freedom fighters. Banta Singh was detected by two officers from the British intelligence. They tried to arrest him, but Banta Singh somehow managed to escape by hitting one policeman and killing another. While Banta Singh escaped, his father Bhutta Singh and his brother Santa Singh were detained on charges of political dacoity. After trial, Bhutta Singh was released, but his brother Santa Singh was sentenced to 14 years of rigorous imprisonment. Two other relatives were sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. On 25th April, Banta Singh killed the British informer Chanda Singh at Nangal Kala village in Hoshiarpur. On 2nd May 1915, a meeting was held by members of the Ghadar party to plan an attack on British office. It was decided to attack the guard at Valla Bridge near Mannanwala railway station in Amritsar district from two sides. Therefore, two groups were formed. One of the groups was led by Banta Singh. On the night of 11 June 1915, the guard was attacked by the Ghadarites. Banta Singh and his group killed 4 men and captured 6 service rifles, and 200 cartridges were captured. On 25th June, he was apprehended at Jora village in Hoshiarpur. Killing of policeman by Banta Singh was considered an act of treason by the British. Efforts were made to nab him, as it was difficult to trace Banta Singh. A prize money was announced to whosoever gave a lead to Banta Singh's whereabouts. The British announced 2 murabbas of land in Jora village at Hoshiarpur district and 5,000 cash prize for any information on Banta Singh. The money and land was enough to lure people. As a result, Pratap Singh, the brother-in-law of Bhutta Singh, informed the British about his possible hideouts. Banta Singh was arrested on 25th June 1915 and was kept in Central Jail in Lahore. He was tried under the martial law and was convicted for killing informer Chanda Singh and the policeman at Valla Railway Bridge in Amritsar. Judges mentioned his name as Banta Singh, which meant someone of the golden teeth, as he filled one of his teeth with gold. Finally, Banta Singh was hanged on 12th August 1915. The followers of Banta Singh were very upset with the treachery. They picked up Pratap Singh and killed him. The body of Pratap Singh was buried on the same land which was given to him as reward by the British. Today, A statue of Banta Singh is installed on Pathankot bypass in Jalandhar, and the road is named Gadri Babe Marg. He was a great revolutionary who contributed significantly to the Indian freedom movement. 24 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaskar friends, today I bring to you a story from the state of Bihar. This story is about Basavan Sinha, who was also referred to as Basavan Singh. He was born in Vaishali, Bihar, and was an activist of the Indian national movement and worked for the rights of agricultural workers, industrial laborers, and downtrodden. Among his revolutionary friends, he was lovingly called Lambad, owing to his tall height. Basavan was born in 1909 into a poor farming family of Bihar. His father died when he was just 8 years old. His mother, despite all odds, continued to keep Basavan in school. Being a good student, he secured scholarships at school, which helped him complete his studies up to matriculation. He passed the examination in high first division and went to college thereafter. He supported his family by teaching other students, sometimes even older ones, who offered him food and lodging in return. At the age of 10, he ran off to Hajipur to attend the rally of Mahatma Gandhi. It is here that he first heard Gandhi and idea of freedom got attached to it. While he performed well at school, he started interacting with revolutionaries like Yogendra Shukla, who started mentoring Basavan. Shukla was one of the founders of Hindustan Socialist Republican Army (HSRA), an Indian revolutionary organization. When the college authorities found out about Basavan's links, he was rusticated from college, bringing an end to his education. Basavan then got fully involved in the freedom struggle. He took formal military training in Patna and became an integral part of the movement which was taking place in Bihar. His name appears as co-accused in several major cases: Tirhut, Kakori, Bhusawal, Deluha conspiracy cases after the Lahore conspiracy in 1929. He went absconding, but he continued to work with revolutionaries like Chandrasekhar Azad and supporting the freedom movement. He was caught and sentenced to 7 years in prison at the Bankipur Central Jail. He escaped and was caught again and imprisoned in Bhagalpur Central Jail. When Basavan noticed inhuman conditions at Bhagalpur jail, he protested and asked for better treatment. When his demands were refused, he went on a fast, a hunger strike. He was moved to Gaya Central Jail and put under solitary confinement. But Basavan did not give up his fast. All efforts to forcibly feed him failed. His health deteriorated and he was shifted to jail's hospital. 50 days passed and he did not give up. They say that every day people waited outside the jail gate to receive his body in case he died. Seeing his determination, all political prisoners in the jail joined Basavan in his fast. 8 days later, he was informed that the demands had been met and all prisoners broke their fast. Almost 2 months on not eating any food made Basavan's body weak and he had to be released from jail in 1936 due to failing health. The police, however, put restriction on his movement. During the initial period of recovery, Basavan stayed at home, but once he felt better, he started to move out again to work for the freedom struggle. The police found out and he was again arrested. After his release, he got involved in the trade union movement. Over a period of time, he established several trade unions across Bihar in the coal fields, sugar mills, mica mines, railways, trade unions in cotton and jute mills, and even in the collieries. He not just worked for the better rights of these workers, but he could also organize the people for the freedom movement. The British found his work unconstitutional and again arrested him along with Jayaprakash Narayan and put him in jail for 6 months in 1937. During the Second World War, he was the first to be arrested under the Defence Ordnance Act in 1940. He was jailed for 18 months during the Quit India movement in 1942. Basavan organized and addressed large rallies in Bihar for the tribal people and the Kisan Sabhas. People joined in thousands at his rallies to hear his speech. He aroused the spirit of freedom amongst the people and urged them to push the British out of the country. His rallies came under the radar of the British, so Basavan, together with his colleagues, activated their guerrilla freedom fighter cell. The cell needed firearms and ammunition. Basavan volunteered to go in disguise to Afghanistan to procure the same. With the British on close trail, Basavan went underground but continued to support the movement. He was caught in Delhi in 1943 and put in prison for 3 years. He was jailed several times during his lifetime and released, spending a total of 18 years of his life in prison and supporting the Indian national movement. After India achieved independence, he continued to work with the trade unions. He was a member of the National Executive of the Socialist Party and founder of the Hind Mazdoor Sabha. His wife Kamla Sinha, who was a two-time member of the Rajya Sabha and ambassador to Suriname and Barbados. She was the first woman Union Minister of State for External Affairs. In 2000, the Government of India issued a commemorative stamp in his name. An indoor stadium too has been named after Basavan Singh in Hajipur, Bihar in his memory. 23 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaskaram, Namaste friends. Today I bring to you the inspiring story of Madhusudan Das, who was a lawyer and social reformer and did trailblazing work in 19th and 20th century, laying foundation of the present state of Odisha. Madhusudan unified Odisha and reformed the Indian judicial system. He was a prolific writer, poet and journalist who was popularly known as Madhu Babu. Some of his most popular work are Utkal Santan, Jati, Itihash and Jananira Ukti, which spoke on the freedom from British shackles. Madhusudan was born on 28 April 1848 in Zamindar family at Satyabhamapur, 20 km from Cuttack. His father was Raghunath Das and mother Parvati Devi. Madhusudan was named Govind Ballabh by his family. He had 2 elder sisters and a younger brother called Gopal Ballabh, who later became a magistrate at Bihar province. After his early education in the village, Madhusudan moved to Cuttack High School. In 1864, he passed matriculation. Madhusudan was interested in imparting education, and so he took to teaching in a school at Balasore for 3 years. He went back to studies and joined Calcutta universities to become the first Odia to attain a bachelor's degree in 1873. He earned his master's and finally became a lawyer in 1878. After returning from Calcutta, he started practicing law. All through, he worked for political, social, and economic upliftment of the people of Odisha. He has been a great inspiration for the advocates of Odisha, because of which his birthday is celebrated as Lawyers' Day in Odisha. In 1866, Odisha faced acute famine, which was called the Nanaka Durviksha. In this famine, more than 1 lakh people died of hunger, seeing pain, hunger, and death all around. Madhusudan took to the freedom struggle, fighting for the rights of the poor, and changed his name from Govind Ballabh to Madhusudan Das. As his home was frequented by social and political reformers, he built a small house at the end of the village. It came to be called Madhukoti. His house was later used as a state office of Kasturba National Memorial Trust, from where Anganwadi and Balwadi centers for children operated. Later, Madhusudan founded the Utkal Sammelani, which brought a social and industrial revolution in Odisha. The linguistic movement in Odisha began in 19th century after centuries of fragmentation of Odia-speaking community under various kingdoms. The first proposal of unification of communities was presented in 1875, but the same was struck down by Sir S.C. Bailey, the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, in 1888. Odia language was banned outside from official use in Odia-speaking district of Sambalpur in 1895, leading to massive protests from public. Madhusudan led the first linguistic movement under Utkal Sammelani. For his relentless work of uniting the state, Madhusudan was called Kula Bruddha, which means grand old man. In 1889, he became the vice president of Utkal Sabha. During his leadership, he protested against several unjust laws by the British. Apparently, Madhusudan opposed the unjust salt laws of British in 1888, long before Mahatma Gandhi did. He was the first Odia to become the member of both Legislative Council and Central Legislative Assembly. He was appointed Minister for Local Self-Government, Medical, Public Health and Public Works in 1921 under the Diarchy scheme. Madhusudan flagged Odisha's cholera problem at the Central Legislative Assembly in 1923, hitting out to the British government for not putting in place the budgetary provision for public health, especially in rural parts of the state. He advocated for advancement in the field of medicine so that diagnosis of the disease and its treatment could be undertaken in a timely manner. This was important as at that time most people in Odisha were illiterate and were victims of superstition. Aside from the fact the insanitary condition and bad health infrastructure prevailed under the British regime. With very limited medical facility, the death rate was very high, especially among rural and even urban population, which adversely impacted the economy of the state. At the time of independence, the average age of an Indian was just about 21 years. Being a staunch feminist, Madhusudan fought the patriarchal system. He adopted two Bengali girls, Sai Bala Das and Sudhan Subla Hazara. Sai Bala was a Bengali whose parents had left her under the care of Madhusudan and his wife Sudhamini Devi. Sai Bala grew up to be an educationist who was trained in England and whose name the famous Sai Bala Women's College of Cuttack was founded. Sudhan Subla Hazara was also a Bengali who went on to become the first female lawyer of British India under Madhusudan's guardianship. Madhu Babu was the resident tutor of Sri Ashutosh Mukherjee, former Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, and Janakinath Bose, father of Subhash Chandra Bose at Ravenshaw College. In 1897, Madhusudan founded the Odisha Artware Works, where work of filigree design on silver ornaments was carried out. He further founded the Utkal Tannery in 1905, which produced shoes and leather products. These were established to provide employment opportunities to the local people, as not many livelihood opportunities were available then. Madhusudan died on 4th February 1934 at the age of 85. Madhusudan's biggest contribution was creation of modern-day Odisha on linguistic lines. He had committed his entire life to the unification of the Odia-speaking regions, and his efforts were finally realized in 1936 when Odisha was given the status of statehood. It was Madhusudan's foresight of asking Odisha to be created on lines of language because after independence, a number of language movements took place and separate states were carved out on the basis of linguistic similarity. Both Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar held Madhusudan Das in high regard. While Gandhiji called him the great philanthropist, Ambedkar recognized him in his speech on caste and minority issues while writing The Untouchables and the Pax Britannica. Madhusudan's work as a writer and a poet both in English and Odia continues to inspire people till date. 22 days to go, जय हिंद, जय भारत।
भारत की कहानी।
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी।
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaskar, Namaste. All of you must have heard about Subhash Chandra Bose. But have you heard about Rasbihari Bose? Today I bring to you his story and his contribution in the freedom struggle of India. Rasbihari Bose was born on May 25th in 1886 in Subalda village, West Bengal. He received his early education from Chandan Nagar, which was a French settlement. The seed of patriotism was sown in him when he read the book Anand Mat, written by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. He went to France and Germany to study medicine and engineering. He returned to India in 1906 and got a job in Fort William. Soon he was transferred to Kasauli in Himachal Pradesh, where he worked at a government printing press. The job was not to his liking, so he left it. He joined as a clerk in the office of the Imperial Forest Research Institute in Dehradun. Though he worked for the British, he always resented their rule in India. Bengal's partition in 1905 filled young Rasbihari with anger and hatred against the British. Working at the Forest Research Institute, Bose learned how to handle chemicals and convert them into crude bombs. In December 1912, as the new imperial capital of New Delhi was getting inaugurated, it was decided to attack Lord Hardinge. Rasbihari was given a powerful bomb and an assistant, a young man called Basant Kumar Biswas, who was flawless revolutionary character. The first rehearsal of the bomb explosion was made on Diwali in 1911 amidst the sound of crackers all around. At the real event on December 23rd, 1912, a petite woman was seen standing on the side of the road as the procession of the Viceroy passed the buildings in Chandni Chowk. All were eagerly waiting for the vice-regal procession. The procession was a celebration of the shifting of the English capital from Kolkata to Delhi. Lord Hardinge, the Viceroy, and his wife were seated on the elephant. A bomb exploded during the procession. The Viceroy was only injured, but the Mahavat was killed. An inquiry was set up and it was found that Basant had thrown the bomb on the procession. Basant, a young boy of 16 years of age, who was called from Bengal by Rasbihari Bose to assist him. In order to hide his identity and escape detection by the British police, Basant had donned a sari and dressed up as a woman during the procession. Rasbihari, who was quietly standing close by, took advantage of the commotion post the bomb explosion and escaped the scene of crime. In the night, he took the train to Dehradun and performed his duty in his office as if it was a regular day. For the next few days, he worked on a mission as an underground agent, but soon he came under the radar of British police. British intelligence started following him. Bose understood that he could be caught at any moment, so he left Dehradun. Rasbihari was the brain behind Ghadar Revolution. February 21st, 1915. It was the date on which revolution was to start, with the tribals moving to cities and capturing government establishments. Rasbihari personally was to move from one cantonment to another dressed as an army officer. But on February 15, 1915, Kripal Singh, a new recruit in the Revolutionary Party, was seen suspiciously moving at Lahore station and was caught. Under the immense torture, he gave away the plans to the British. The revolutionaries were captured and tried in the court. The revolt fizzled out. A special tribunal was set up to hear the case of Lahore conspiracy. The judgment was read on September 13, 1915. Of the accused, 24 were sentenced to death, 27 were transported for life, while the others served various sentences of imprisonment. With great difficulty, Rasbihari reached the Japanese ship Sonaki and on May 1915 fled India under the assumed identity of P.N. Thakur. He reached the port of Kobe on June 5, 1915. After he reached Tokyo, he met Sun Yat-sen, the great Chinese nationalist who was living in exile in Japan. Rasbihari sent arms and ammunition to his revolutionary group from Singapore. The British therefore started forcing the Japanese government to issue a deportation order for Rasbihari. After he managed to dodge the Japanese police with the help of Toyama Mitsuru and Soma family of Nakamuraya, Japan was never safe for Rasbihari as the detective agencies were on his lookout. It was Toshika Soma, a Japanese lady, the eldest daughter of his host, the Soma family, which stood as a shield between Rasbihari and British. She married Rasbihari against the current cultural norm of the country, which did not like natives marrying people from foreign lands. The motive of Toshiko Soma behind marrying Rasbihari was to accompany him all the time. This was the best way to escape the eyes of the British spy. For the first time, Rasbihari could afford the safety of a permanent home. During the initial time when the wealthy Soma family hid him in the basement of their Nakamura bakery, Rasbihari worked with the chefs of the bakery to create Indian curry. The curry is still a rage in Japan and has 6 billion servings annually. Rasbihari continued to deliver lectures across Japan, hold meetings with revolutionaries, and support the Indian freedom struggle from Japan. It was in Japan that the seeds of INA were sown and nurtured. In 1942, Rasbihari Bose established the Indian Independence League, IIL, an army that would fight for India's freedom. At Bangkok Conference, it was decided to incorporate the INA into Indian Independence League. With Rasbihari serving as its chairman, he subsequently handed the reins to Subhash Chandra Bose, who developed it as Indian National Army or Azad Hind Fauj. The Azad Hind Fauj played a significant role in weakening the British administrative hold on India, which was accepted by the then British Prime Minister Clement Attlee. In February 1944, Rasbihari died of ill health. At the age of 58, the Japanese government honored him with the highest title given to a foreigner, the Second Order of Merit of the Rising Sun. On December 26, 1967, the Post and Telegraph Department of India issued a special postage stamp in the honor of Rasbihari Bose. 21 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaste, Pranam. Today I bring to you a story from the erstwhile United Province, now known as Uttar Pradesh. This story is about Roshan Singh, who was an Indian revolutionary belonging to the Thakur community of Shahjahanpur district, Uttar Pradesh. He was a fine wrestler and an ace sharpshooter. The 35-year-old martyr laid down his life fighting the British. Such was the fear of this young man amongst the British that they falsely accused him in the Kakori case and hanged him to death 2 days prior to his actual hanging. But British atrocities did not end with Roshan's life. His family and 7 daughters continued to bear the brunt of British injustice. Roshan Singh was born in 1892 into the Zamindari Thakur household of Kaushalya Devi and Jangi Singh in Navada village. Early on, Roshan got associated with the Arya Samaj movement of Shahjahanpur. The Indian national movement was gaining momentum and Roshan too joined the volunteer corps to fight for India's freedom. His family is said to have encouraged and supported him to fight colonial rule. The non-cooperation movement was launched in 1920 to boycott the government schools, courts and foreign goods. The Volunteer Corps wholeheartedly supported this movement, where foreign goods were burnt at every nook and corner of the country. Panchayats were encouraged to be used to solve disputes instead of the government setup. The Volunteer Corps became more and more active, and the British started viewing it as a threat. Evidently, the British imperialists went ahead and banned it in 1921. The young volunteers decided to oppose the decision of the government. Roshan led a group of volunteers in Bareilly, where the police opened fire to stop the procession. Roshan, who knew how to use a gun, snatched a pistol from a British policeman and fired in the air. Roshan, along with the other protesters, were arrested and a case was filed against them. Roshan was sentenced to 2 years of rigorous imprisonment and sent to the central jail in Bareilly. He was subjected to harsh and brutal treatment at the central jail by the jailer. This further resolved Roshan into taking revenge against the inhuman British government. In the Bareilly jail, Roshan met members of the Hindustan Republican Association (HRA), who informed him of the work of the Revolutionary Party and persuaded him to join the HRA. After being released, he met Pandit Ram Prasad Bismil, a member of the HRA, who enrolled Roshan immediately to train the young recruits in shooting. The HRA needed money to buy the ammunition and guns. They went around asking for funds, but most had committed their money to the Congress and the Swaraj Party. Without money, there would be no revolution. HRA therefore decided to steal money from the rich and use the money for their revolutionary activities. The HRA gave the operation the term Action, a code word of the party. Baldev Prasad, a rich money lender and sugar merchant of Bamroli near Pilibhit, was chosen as the target for their first action. The HRA estimated that they could get at least 4,000 rupees and gold and silver from his house. This would allow them to get a good stock of arms. Thakur Roshan Singh was asked to lead. On Christmas night in 1924, the action men entered the house of the target. Though they carried pistols, they imagined the robbery to be without resistance. To their surprise, the village wrestler Mohan Lal had been asked to stay at Baldev's house for protection. He challenged the group entering the house and opened fire on them. In retaliation, Roshan, who was a sharpshooter, shot and killed the wrestler on the spot. This incident caught the attention of the British, and they started to keep an eye on not just the activities of the HRA but also Thakur Roshan Singh, whom they could not nab. They saw the fearlessness and courage of Thakur as a threat. On August 9, 1925, the HRA executed another robbery. This time they decided to intercept the train which was carrying the taxes collected from Indians to the British office. They had news that the bags contained about 4,600 rupees. The robbery was conceived by Ram Prasad Bismil and Ashfaqullah Khan and executed by Rajendra Lahiri and others. The train was intercepted at Kakori village near Lucknow, where Lahiri pulled the emergency chain. A passenger was killed unintentionally. The revolutionaries stole only those bags which had the Indian taxpayers' money and made their way to Lucknow. A massive manhunt was launched by the British to arrest the revolutionaries. 40 people were arrested from all over the country. The British used Kakori incident as an alibi and wrongfully caught the booked Roshan Singh in the train robbery case. Roshan rejected the charge of being a part of the Kakori conspiracy, so they added the charge of Bamroli dacoity case. Despite no evidence, along with Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan and Rajendra Nath Lahiri, Roshan too was sentenced to death. 16 others were given imprisonment. The British sent all those charged and arrested to different jails across the country, fearing that if they were put together, they might escape. This was the British way to finish the HRA. Legend has it that when the judgment was delivered and Roshan was awarded death sentence, he hugged Ram Prasad Bismil and said, "Pandit, you thought you would go to the gallows alone. This Thakur is not leaving you and going right till the end with you." The whole country protested against this merciless death sentence, but the British did not deter. In jail, the revolutionaries demanded to be treated as political prisoners since they were fighting the British. They demanded that they be given the treatment and rights of political prisoners like anywhere else in the world. The British refused. The revolutionaries went on a hunger strike to protest against the British yet again. The British authorities were fearful that hanging of the revolutionaries might backfire, so they executed the hangings of the revolutionaries days before it was scheduled. Roshan Singh was hanged on 19 December 1927 at the Naini jail in Allahabad. But even after Roshan Singh's death, his wife Kaushalya Devi and his daughter had to go through a lot of hardships. His family was ostracized both socially and economically. Every time a family came forward to marry one of Roshan's daughters, the police officers would threaten the family that they would be declared traitors if they married into the family. They had no money to sustain themselves and lived a life of poverty and anonymity. The last letter that Roshan wrote from the prison cell was to his cousin and friend Hukum Singh. He urged his family and friends not to be angry on his death but be happy that he sacrificed his life for the freedom of this country. He also stated that he was the first person to be sentenced from their village and who brought glory to their village men and women. To this date, this village is known as Thakur Roshan Singh's village. It is not without the contribution of these unsung heroes that we have gained independence from the British. Let us remember and pay respects to these brave fighters who sacrificed their lives for our great nation. 20 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaskaram. Hello friends. Today I bring to you the inspiring story of Karnad Sadashiv Rao, who was a social reformer and an Indian freedom fighter from Karnataka. He was the first person from Karnataka to join the Satyagraha pledge and played a vital role in motivating the people of Karnataka in joining the freedom movement. Born in 1881 in Mangalore to parents Ramachandra Rao and Radhabai, he was the only son of the couple. Born into an affluent family of Mangalore, he was sent to study in the best available schools for education. Sadashiv was good at studies and worked hard. He was also active in sports and athletics through his schooling and later his college days. He went to the prestigious Presidency College in Madras to graduate. Thereafter, when he wanted to study law, his parents sent him to Bombay to study. He finished his law studies and came back to Mangalore, where he set up his practice. Being from a wealthy family, he remained largely away from the harsh realities of India. But his practice as a lawyer taught him much: caste system, backwardness, lack of education, superstition, social evils, economic injustice, plight of widows. These were the social reforms which had become issues he came across on a daily basis and was moved by them. His affluence and education gave him a position of power, and he started to use it to address these issues and even try and remove them to whatever extent possible at an individual level. He was married to Shantabai, who like him believed in his principles and worked towards the betterment of the society. She gave strength to him and his work. Sadashiv was moved by the plight of women and especially the widows, to help improve their status in society. And with the aim to provide them with an economic independence, he, together with his wife, founded the Mahila Sabha with the sole aim of helping the downtrodden and widow women. Through their organization, they helped several women receive education and skills. They trained women to take up skills which could help them earn a living. There was training for nurses, teachers, spinning and weaving, tailoring, which was imparted to the women so that they could become economically independent and thereby help uplift their social status in the society. He organized widow remarriage, especially of child widows who, for no fault of theirs, were made to suffer throughout their lives. He soon started participating in the work of the Indian national movement. He was greatly influenced by the principles of Mahatma Gandhi and worked on causes which he talked about. For all this, he started to be known as Gandhi of the South. He was moved by the plight of the Harijan Samaj, and like Gandhi, he worked for their betterment. He not only worked towards providing them with education and skills, but he also worked for various other social reforms. He joined hands with another well-known social reformer, Kudmul Ranga Rao, who worked on various social issues, and together they made quite an impact. Together with his wife, they started a school at his home, which provided education to people from all walks of the society, especially people from the Harijan community. Karnad and his wife had taken to Khadi on the call of Mahatma Gandhi. At their school, they taught students spinning and weaving. Impressed with the results of the school, Karnad used his own personal money to set up another 8 skill centers across Mangalore, imparting knowledge of not just khadi but also other handicrafts. During World War I, when his people faced near famine-like conditions, he distributed the rice from his land free to the poor. When this wasn't enough, he used his own personal wealth to buy rice from the market and sold it at an affordable price to the poor, who were by now almost starving. He never thought twice before using his wealth for the needy. His well-wishers warned him that at this rate he would not have any money left for himself or his family, but he did not pay heed. If he saw someone needy, he moved to find a way to help him. When Mahatma Gandhi called for all people to join the Indian national movement to free our country from the rule of the British, Karnad gave up his legal practice and wholeheartedly immersed himself into freedom struggle. With the British forces diverted with World War I, they feared that the Indian revolutionaries may take advantage and launch an attack and create unrest in India. They therefore passed the Rowlatt Act, which criminalized dissent, and anybody speaking or acting against the British were to be arrested without a trial. Mahatma Gandhi opposed it. In his ashram, he drafted a pledge called the Satyagraha Pledge. Signatories of the pledge were to court arrest unless the British withdrew the bill. Sadashiv was the first from Karnataka to sign the pledge. Mahatma Gandhi toured the country garnering support for the Satyagraha Pledge, and Sadashiv moved with Gandhi's message to every small town and village in Karnataka. When Mahatma Gandhi and Kasturba Gandhi visited his district, Sadashiv accompanied them on their tour. Soon his house became a hub of political activities. He started organizing spinning and weaving programs at the village centers, where they were trained as well as given awareness about the freedom struggle. His wife, who was not only a great personal support to Sadashiv, but also a fellow partner in his work, died suddenly in 1921. He soon lost his only son and daughter too. He was shattered. Such personal loss at such a short interval left him broken. He went to Gandhiji to visit him in his ashram in Ahmedabad. Most people thought that this would be the end of Sadashiv's active work in social and political sphere, but he heard about the floods in South Karnataka and he promptly left the ashram to organize relief work for the affected people. He participated in the Gandhi March and continued the Satyagraha movement despite his ill health. He was in Faizpur for a conference in 1936, when it is said that he stayed in a hut which had holes. He had no money left by now and he could not afford a better accommodation. Torrential rain that night caught him wet, and he caught cold and fever. He left the next day for Mumbai as per plans, but his condition deteriorated. He breathed his last shortly afterwards in 1937. Sadashiv spent all his wealth on the welfare of the poor and the Indian national movement, so much so that he was penniless when he died and could not leave any money for someone to perform his last rites. Much after his death, a road was named after him in Mangalore, and a colony in Bangalore too is named after him. Let us recall his contribution to the India's freedom movement in this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. 19 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaskar, Namaste, hello. We started this journey on 1st June 2022, wherein we marked 75 days to the 75th Independence Day. With just 18 days left, I bring you another story from the land which was one of the two main regions of our freedom movement, that is Bengal and Punjab. This story is about Trilokinath Chakravarti, who was an anti-British revolutionary, also known as Maharaj, who started participating in the freedom struggle at the age of only 7. In 1906, at the age of 17, he joined the Anushilan Samiti while still being a student in school. Trilokinath was so dedicated to the freedom struggle that he left everything, including his family, to devote himself fully to the cause of Indian independence. In 1906, soon after joining the Anushilan Samiti, he was elected the leader of the Dhaka chapter of the organization. Just 2 years later, in 1908, at the age of 19, he was arrested for his revolutionary activities. As a result of this, he could not even complete his school education. In 1912, Trilokinath was arrested again, this time for his alleged involvement in a murder. He was later released for the lack of evidence against him. Trilokinath went on to work with underground organizations in Rajshahi, Komila, Malda. In 1914, he was arrested in Calcutta and was transported to Andamans as an accused in the Barisal conspiracy case. He was also one of the main accused of the Dhaka conspiracy case. Trilokinath was born in 1889 at Kapasiatia in Maimansingh district, and he got hugely influenced by his father, Durga Charan, a supporter of the nationalist movement, and his brother, Vyamini Mohan, who was actively involved with the revolutionaries. One of his major influences was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, whose philosophy to defeat the British through the armed struggle guided Trilokinath immensely. He knew at least 4 languages other than English. Even though Trilokinath could not complete his education and had to drop out of school, he learned these languages while in prison from the other prisoners who had also been jailed for participation in the freedom struggle. Interestingly, of the 80 years that he lived, Trilokinath spent at least 30 years in jail. Some years of his jail term were in Bangladesh after the Indian independence in Bangladesh, which was under Pakistan control after the partition of India into India and Pakistan. The Barisal conspiracy case of 1913 had a huge impact on Trilokinath's life. This year, the British discovered a systemic plan to incite natives in the British army against the masters. The natives had been instructed to kill any and every British officer that came their way. The documents that were discovered by the colonial police in Barisal showed that the whole operation had been planned by Dhaka Anushilan Samiti under the leadership of Trilokinath Chakravarti and Praful Chandra Ganguly. For 2 years, Trilokinath remained on the run and absconded from the scene. The British could not find Trilokinath anywhere but kept their hunt on for him. Finally, when the British found Trilokinath, they sent him to the Andaman prison to serve Kala Pani for his involvement in this case. Trilokinath came back to Calcutta after completing the term of his sentence and took the charge of the national school. In 1927, he was arrested one more time and sent to a prison at Hon'ble in Burma. When he was released from prison in 1928, he joined the Hindustan Republican Army of Chandrasekhar Azad and Bhagat Singh. A year later, in 1929, he participated in the Lahore Congress and was once again sent to jail by the British from 1930 to 1938. After his release, Trilokinath joined the Ramgarh Congress. As part of the Congress, he put all his might behind stirring a rebellion in the British Indian Army during the Second World War. However, his attempt wasn't as successful as Trilokinath would have wanted it to be. Not one to be dejected or held back, soon after he participated in the Quit India movement and was again imprisoned in 1942. After serving rigorous imprisonment for 4 years, he was released from jail in 1946. There was need for people to pay attention to activities in Noakhali, and Trilokinath decided to devote himself to organizational activities in Noakhali. After the partition of India in 1947, Trilokinath decided to live in East Pakistan so that he could fight for the rights of minorities. In order to serve the people of this region, Trilokinath joined politics in Dhaka, East Pakistan. He founded the Pakistan Socialist Party and was elected as a member of the Provincial Assembly in 1954 as a nominee of the United Front. In 1958, once the martial law was promulgated in the country, Trilokinath was restrained from political and social activities. He passed the closing years of his life in self-exile at his village home. He wrote 2 memoirs on contemporary politics titled Jele Trish Bachar, Pak Bharter Swadhinta Sangram. His other contribution is Geeta Swaraj. In 1970, he went to Calcutta for medical treatment, from where he was brought to Delhi and was accorded national reception. He died on 9th August 1970. A 2-minute silence was observed in Lok Sabha, the lower house of Indian Parliament, following Chakrabarti's death as a mark of respect. Such was Trilokinath's contribution to the freedom struggle that India's then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi said to have remarked for him. His daring and courage inspired young men of older generation. Long years of suffering didn't weaken his belief in democracy or his complete commitment to socialism and secularism. Trilokinath died just a year before East Pakistan found true liberation, and many believe that he died a man with a broken heart because he never managed to live in an entirely independent country. He is revered till date because he gave up his own freedom for the freedom of everyone else. 18 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Hello friends, Namaskar. In the history of Indian revolutionary movements, we need to remember Lachit Borphukan, who was the greatest warriors that Assam had ever seen. He was the Shivaji or Rana Pratap of Assam. Lachit Borphukan was born on 24th November 1622 to Momai Tamuli Bor Barua and Kunti Moran. His father was the commander-in-chief of the Assamese or Ahom army. The Ahom kingdom was located in the Brahmaputra valley of the then eastern India and was first established in the early 1228. However, the kingdom could not exist in peace as they were repeatedly assailed upon by the Turks and Afghan rulers of the then Delhi Sultanate as well as the Mughal Empire. Lachit Borphukan grew up in the backdrop of the inexorable Turk and Mughal rulers. He witnessed how torturous and barbaric who constantly haunted the Ahomiyas there. Lachit, in his childhood, was fascinated by the study of arts or humanities. While studying, he was inspired by various teachers who would explain to him about the secret revolutionary movements against the ruthless Mughals and other enemy invaders. So inspired by the freedom struggle against the Mughals, he pursued military studies and scriptures. He successfully completed his education and received distinction for the same. He was known for his knowledge on defense tactics. The Mughal-Ahom conflict began around 1614 and continued for a long time thereafter. Looking at Lachit's knowledge and skills that he grew over the years, he was given the responsibility of serving as the scarf bearer or Soldhara Barua, as the Ahomiyas call it, a modern-day equivalent of a private assistant to Ahom king. He was also delegated other important positions such as superintendent of stable of royal horses and superintendent of the royal household guards much before getting appointed as the commander of the Ahom army. Lachit first came into prominence when he recovered Guwahati from the Mughals in 1667 and was presented with Hangdang, a gold-plated sword. Lachit Borphukan is however known the most for his valor in the Battle of Sarai Ghat. That was one of the worst defeats that the Mughals had ever faced in the history. In 1663, by the time of Lachit Borphukan was appointed as commander, the Mughals had brutally occupied Guwahati and had compelled the Ahom kingdom to sign the humiliating peace treaty of Giljaria Ghat, which imposed harsh conditions on them. According to the treaty, Jayadhwaj Singha, the 20th king of the Ahom kingdom, was forced to supply 90 elephants, send 3 lakh tolas of silver, also hand over the entire region of the West Bareilly river on the north bank of Brahmaputra and Kalang on the south to Delhi. The humiliation did not just end there. He was forced to send one of his daughters to the imperial Mughal harem on coercion. This shattered Jayadhwaj Singha from the core, and soon thereafter he passed away due to the humiliation caused by the defeat at the hands of Bengal Subedar Mir Jumla. Later his successor Chakradhwaj Singha vowed to regain the honor of the Ahoms and began to strategize a complete remodeling of the kingdom. It was during this time that Lachit was made the commander-in-chief of the army. King Chakradhwaj Singha resolved to rid the entire Mughal-occupied region, for which the name of the master of tactics, Lachit Borphukan, emerged, who will carry out the operation. Lachit raised the army and finished preparations. By the summer of 1667, Lachit and his army fearlessly and successfully retook Guwahati from the Mughal forces. It reached the ears of Emperor Aurangzeb about the defeat at Guwahati. This infuriated the cruel Aurangzeb, who constantly passed instructions to send an expeditionary force from Dhaka. In those times, Aurangzeb was known for his religious partiality, imposition of jizya or tax paid by non-Muslims to the Muslim ruler, destruction of temples and open hatred towards Hindus that alienated large sections of the population. Lachit Borphukan knew his Ahom forces and their strengths very well. He was a practical and sharp strategist. He knew that he could be defeated by the numerical and technological inferiority against the Mughal forces. So he resorted to guerrilla warfare tactics and launched a vicious attack on the Mughals from every way possible. In the meanwhile, Aurangzeb and his commanders were also indulged in psychological operations. They sent informants. One of them was Ram Singh to Raja Chakradhwaj Singha to propagate that Lachit Borphukan was paid 1 lakh rupees in cash against a settlement to evacuate Guwahati. This angered the king. He started to doubt Lachit's sincerity and loyalty, but his then Prime Minister, Atan Borgohain, convinced him that this was a deceptive move played by the Mughals to make Chakradhwaj Singha dismiss Commander Lachit, who was successfully fighting the Mughals so far. So the king felt dreadful for his suspicion towards an honest commander who was fighting selflessly to free Guwahati from the ruthless Mughals. On the other hand, Lachit Borphukun was successful to wither away the Mughal army. While fighting them at some point, Lachit and some of his soldiers were on an Ahom flotilla near Saraighat. A sudden attack by the barbarous Mughal troops outnumbered and outgunned them in an open space. Soon the Ahom soldiers began to lose their will to fight. Some of them tried to retreat desperately. Looking at this, Lachit boarded a boat himself to rally his troops out of the danger zone. One of his troops offered to be taken to safe area. Soon, Lachit threw some of them into the water to save them from a direct hit. Even though some of them were severely ill, Lachit loudly shouted, saying, "I would die fulfilling my duty to my king and country, even if it meant that I have to do it by myself." Inspired by this, Lachit's soldiers rallied and a desperate battle ensued on the river Brahmaputra. Eventually, Lachit Borphukun was victorious and the unsparing Mughals were forced to retreat from Guwahati. Battle of Saraighat would be remembered for the victory for a reason. Lachit had a much smaller Ahom army over the mighty Mughal army, but through a combination of tactical mastery, guerrilla warfare tactics, and sharp intelligence gathering, he made the impossible possible. In a sense, Saraighat would be the last attempt by the Mughals to extend their empire into Assam. Later in the year 1672, Lachit Borphukun passed away and his remains reside in peace at Lachit Maidam, constructed in the same year by King Udayaditya Singha at Hulungpara, 16 km from Jorhat. To honor Lachit Borphukun, on 24th of November each year, Lachit Divas is celebrated statewide in Assam to commemorate the heroism of his. The best passing out cadet at the National Defence Academy is awarded the Lachit Borphukun Gold Medal, which was instituted by the Assam government in the year 2000. The combination that Lachit Borphukun was made of is his intellect and execution power. He made it his dharma and karma to defeat the Mughals at any cost. We remember his contribution to India's freedom struggle in this Amrit Kal. 17 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Today, I will be narrating to you the story of Bishni Devi Shah from Almora, which is a part of the Kumaon region in Uttarakhand. Bishni Devi was born on 12th October 1902 in Bageshwar. She received elementary education in a village according to the social norms prevalent in those days. Bishni Devi was married off at the tender age of 13. Post-marriage, Bishni Devi got involved in household chores, but destiny had something else in store for her. At the age of 16, 3 years into her marriage, Bishni lost her husband. With that, the situation completely changed for young Bishni Devi. She soon realized that neither could she live with her parents nor with her parent-in-laws. Her struggle for survival was now real, but Bishni's courage and resilience helped her cross all hurdles and create a mark which will be remembered for ages. Bishni Devi started living on her own. At the age of 19, she got interested in the ongoing freedom movement and went on to become the first woman to unfurl the flag at the government building in Almora on 25th May 1930. This was the time when the freedom movement was at its peak. people would often assemble at Nanda Devi temple to share the developments taking place in the country and discuss the activities up ahead. Bishni Devi would also attend these meetings. She would apply tilak on the forehead of the freedom fighters who would be participating in the protests and courting arrests. She would sing songs written by Kumauni poet Girda during the Bhajan Sandhyas. These Sandhyas were attended by the local community, especially women, who would gather in the evening after completing their daily works. The Bhajans helped in creating awareness amongst the villagers and informing them on how the country was rising against the British rule. As the freedom movement grew, so did the interest of women in the movement. With the efforts made by the likes of Bishni Devi, women started coming out from the four walls of their house and participating in the protests along with the men. Between 1929 and 1930, a number of women in Kumaon joined the freedom struggle. In one of the meetings, it was decided that the national flag would be hoisted at the municipal building of Almora on 25th May 1930. Both men and women joined the protest in large numbers and marched up to the municipality. Gurkha forces intercepted the procession. Known leaders from Kumaon region, Mohanlal Joshi, Shantilal Trivedi, were attacked by the British forces and were injured. Seeing the Gurkha forces charging at the men, Bishni Devi quietly moved aside along with Durga Devi Pant, Tulsi Devi Rawat, Bhakti Devi Trivedi, Revati Devi and few other women. They managed to climb the Almora municipal building and Bishni Devi hoisted the national flag on top of it. The aim with which the procession was organized had been achieved. It was Bishni Devi who achieved this feat. In December 1930, Bishni Devi was arrested. As a punishment for her participation in the freedom struggle and the hoisting of the flag, she was put in Almora jail. She was the first woman in Uttarakhand to be arrested for participating in the freedom movement. Nothing could deter the strong-willed Bishni Devi, who would often be heard reciting this poem in jail. जेल न समझो बिरादर जेल जाने के लिए या कृष्ण का मंदिर है प्रसाद पाने के लिए. After getting released from the jail, Bishni Devi once again joined the freedom movement. She followed the call given by Mahatma Gandhi to discard Western clothes and wear only hand-spun khadi, which also marked a protest against the sale and purchase of foreign goods. She went home to home selling the charkha so that people could spin khadi. The cost of the charkha was 10 rupees, which seemed heavy on the pockets of the villagers. It was on her insistence that the cost of the charkha was subsidized and reduced to 5 rupees. She not just sold the charkha but would gather women in groups and teach them how to spin. It was a good place to discuss, among other things, the freedom struggle. Bishni Devi, who rendered support in different ways for India's freedom struggle, inspired many women. With time, Bishni Devi started traveling out of Almora to support the freedom struggle. On 2nd February 1931, the women in Bageshwar decided to organize a big procession protesting against British rule. To support the efforts of the women in Bageshwar, Bishni Devi donated 50 rupees and 2 nali land. She understood that the funds were required to arrange any meeting or programs. So she started reaching out to people in faraway habitations, seeking donations to support the freedom struggle. She was left with nothing to support her own self financially in the coming days, but she did not bother about it. Bishni Devi was the key messenger for freedom fighters. She would often carry their messages from one place to the other. British forces were already watchful of the actions of Bishni Devi. On 7 July 1933, Bishni Devi was once again arrested. This time she served 9 months in prison. A fine of rupees 200 was levied on Bishni Devi, which she was required to pay within a stipulated time period. But as Bishni Devi failed to pay the fine, her punishment in jail was extended by a year. However, due to failing health, she was released early from the prison. The British administration imposed Section 144 on January 14th, the day India celebrates Makar Sankranti. It was a move to avoid gathering of people in common area and along the markets. Bishni Devi was undeterred by Section 144 and decided to put up a stall of handspun khadi. During this time, Govind Ballabh Pant a known leader from Uttarakhand, attended a meeting of the freedom fighters in Ranikhet. Bishni Devi was invited to the meeting and was formally inducted during the freedom movement here. On another occasion, Bishni Devi was invited to hoist the national flag in the newly formed office at Almora. The ceremony was presided over by women freedom fighters of the time who were deeply impressed by the work of Bishni Devi. On 26 January 1940, Bishni Devi once again hoisted the flag in the premises of the Nanda Devi temple. It was a mark of protest against the British imperialism. She actively participated in the Quit India movement. On 15th August 1947, the day India attained independence, Bishni Devi led the procession holding the national flag and chanting slogans in utter joy. Her dream, along with that of many others, had come true. As she had no family support, Bishni Devi struggled with finances in the last years of her life. She died in 1974. Bishni Devi filled the void created by the death of her husband by giving her all to the freedom movement. The state of Uttarakhand and the whole of India will always remember with pride the role played by Bishni Devi in the freedom movement. 16 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।